Welcome to the Accidental Experts podcast. I'm your host, Bryce Hamilton. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and a child and family therapist. I have been in practice for over 15 years, and I'm also a mom of 4. So I know the challenges both professionally and personally. I'm so glad that you're here today to grow your parenting toolbox. Please come as you are and be ready to learn. My goal is to make you the accidental expert so that you can raise healthy humans. Hey everyone, welcome back. I'm so excited to talk about our topic today. It is about ADHD in girls. And as you know, I am a mom of 4 kids. 3 so far have ADHD, 2 are girls. And so this is a topic near and dear to my heart. Not only that, but then also I have ADHD, and being a girl with ADHD presented some, challenges. And so I want to help educate families to know more about ADHD so that we can help get people screened and diagnosed earlier in life so that we can provide them with more resources. I am going to be interviewing today the founder of findtheadhdgirls.org, and her name is Cynthia Hammer. She is the executive director at Inattentive ADHD Coalition. She's an author of Living with Inattentive ADHD, founder and director of ADHD ADD resources for 15 years, and also a social worker with a master's in social work. With that, I will introduce you to Cynthia.
Great. I'm looking forward to the conversation, especially since I know I'm talking to someone else that has ADHD. We seem to have our own ways of interacting.
Yes, totally. And I think this is such an important topic. And often I think we miss we miss girls and our ADHD diagnosing because we're looking at it through a certain lens. And so I'm so excited for you to talk to us about maybe how to see this differently to help our daughters to be more successful, especially because getting a diagnosis sooner in life
Right.
is so helpful in learning how to navigate and respond and give tools and skills to help them be successful.
Right. And so I don't know if your audience knows that during COVID, a lot of women were staying home and they lost the structure in their lives. And that is when they started to watch TikTok and realize that they had ADHD. And so we have this cohort of women that are in their 40s or later who never knew earlier. And from hearing their stories, we know how damaging it was to their
Mhm.
lives to not get the early diagnosis. So that combined with just knowing that boys get diagnosed by age 7 and girls were getting diagnosed when they got diagnosed, even today, they were getting diagnosed closer to age 12. That's what motivated us to say girls need to be diagnosed before age 8. And actually, because this is a condition we're born with, I really think it's best if we're diagnosed at birth, but we
Hmm.
don't know how to do that.
Yeah.
And talking with the various professions, they say, well, I'm comfortable diagnosing by age 7.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, and it's so important because there's so many things that we're learning in life in those early years, right? Like our development is so fast. And I think something that sticks out to me, I'm going to get the statistic wrong, but bear with me, that there are so many more redirections and corrections that kids with ADHD have than the population that does not have ADHD. So then, those kids, their self-esteem is impacted, their confidence is impacted, their willingness to try new things is impacted because they don't want to do it wrong because they keep getting redirected or corrected to get back on task or do something else. And that can be really hard on them too.
Right, and well, it's combined with the fact that we know children with ADHD often have what's called rejection sensitivity dysphoria. So even when they get criticized, it is wounding them more than it
Hmm.
might wound other children just because of their way their brain is wired. And we know because of their different behaviors with ADHD, they're more likely to get criticized, and
Yeah.
then they're getting criticized more often and it's wounding them more deeply. So that's another concern, is why we want to get the interventions started early.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so let's jump in and talk about how is ADHD presentation in girls different than boys? So, what do parents need to be looking for? What are we seeing?
Well, it's not the across the board different because we talk about maybe two types of ADHD, combined type where the person is high energy, but they also have a lot of the forgetfulness, not paying attention issues. Those people we call, they're the more hyperactive ones, the combined
Mm-hmm.
type. Now there are girls that are the hyperactive type. Even you said, Bryce, that you were.
Yep,
But
that was definitely me. Yeah.
even when the girls are hyperactive, parents don't look at it that way. They
Mm-hmm.
don't suddenly say, oh, could this be ADHD? Because there's such a strong image in the public that this is a boy presentation. So when
Mm-hmm.
girls present that way, they're just looked on more as being too energetic, or that's their personality. No one's ever thinking this could be a treatable condition. So there are girls that are the hyperactive, but even those girls, when I've talked to them, and I don't know if you experience this, but they said they suppressed their hyperactivity because they got such strong social messages that this is not how girls should behave.
Mm-hmm.
And one girl told me that she was biting the inside of her tongue, or inside of her cheek in school to remind herself to stay in her seat, so
Mm.
that the girls that have the combined type are masking their behavior because they get strong messages, this is not how you should behave. Now
Yep.
the other type is called the inattentive type, and there are boys that have the inattentive type and they're less diagnosed, just like the
Mm-hmm.
girls with the inattentive are less diagnosed because society has gotten such a strong message that ADHD means this hyperactive, disruptive little boy. So to think of it as there's two presentations,
Mm-hmm.
one where you're in people's faces, you're loud, you're maybe full of energy, and the other presentation is where you're more shy, you're introverted. You might have energy if you're really interested in something, but it's not lasting all day long. In fact, those of us with inattentive are somewhat jealous of the ones that have the high energy because I think they can accomplish more in life.
Yeah, well, maybe. I don't know. I think I still sometimes have the energy, but it's also like so situational, right? Like it's like, and maybe that's as I've aged, but it's the difficulty is definitely still there. Like it's harder to stay on task unless it's something that really interests me.
Hmm.
Yeah. I mean, and I think the thing I love about ADHD is that you know one person with ADHD and you just know one person with ADHD. It's
Uh,
not that there is one presentation. Like you
well,
just said, there's two types, but it's like there's so many variances of
oh,
what that
more
looks
than
like.
that. Yeah, I gave a presentation about that, which you'll appreciate as a social worker, because bring in all the social elements that can impact the child with ADHD. Besides um, the minimum you'd have is five of the 18 symptoms. So you could have a child that has five symptoms that has ADHD. You could have a child that has all 18 symptoms. So right there's that variety. They could have the symptoms to different degrees of severity. Then
Yeah.
they're born into different families, into different communities, into different social classes. All those things are they could be one child in a family of eight, or they could be the only child.
Hmm.
All those things are going to impact how their ADHD is experienced and how it interacts with the environment.
Sure. So can you talk to us about like what are we looking for in terms of ADHD? Like what are the symptoms that are typically showing up that might be signs that our kid has ADHD?
On our website, we have a checklist we've developed with
Hmm.
physicians and psychologists, and it's just geared for 7-year-old girls. So the symptoms there are for 7-year-old girls. And it relies on the DSM, but we've expanded it because of what we've learned since the
Hmm.
DSM came out.
Yeah.
But the major symptoms you'd be looking for in girls is inattentiveness, that they make careless mistakes in their schoolwork, they're missing details. They take excessive time to complete tasks like their
Hmm.
self care. They have difficulty maintaining attention. They get distracted. They have trouble staying focused even during a conversation. They get quickly bored unless the subject interests them, or they have an extreme focus on things that greatly interest them.
Hmm.
They have poor listening skills. They seem to be elsewhere in the middle of a conversation. They might require repeating instructions. They often are, which is helpful to them, but they're doing something else while they're listening to you. And they
Yes.
have trouble following directions. Then they have poor organization and lots of forgetfulness. So they might have a poor sense of time. They forget what someone has told them. They need frequent reminders. And I think this is an issue where parents fall into the habit of reminding their child. So they're not even aware that they're cueing the child so often. I have two grandchildren, and I can see the difference where one child, the parent is always cueing, and the other grandchild in a different family is the same age, but can go do these tasks with no reminders. So the parent kind of forgets that, gee, a child at 7 years old should be able to go brush their teeth at night without me reminding them. But
Sure.
the parent falls into a habit that sometimes can help mask the symptoms as well. They have trouble getting starting on a task. They have trouble completing a task. They're often disorganized and messy. My son that had the inattentive type, periodically he would clean up his room and be very particular about everything looking great. And then he couldn't maintain it. In a few days, it would be messy again. And so people with ADD talk like they have their own way of organizing, but it's often with piles, because if something's out of sight, they forget about it.
Yep.
And I'm trying to exercise every day, so I leave my equipment out in sight, because if I didn't do that, I wouldn't have the cue to remind myself I need to exercise today. They're just disorganized often in their appearance. If you weren't helping them to choose their clothes and change the clothes every day, they probably would put together the nearest thing at hand.
Yes.
Yeah,
it's funny. I want to interrupt you. One of my daughters with ADHD, she was making me laugh because I accidentally bought the same dress. So it was like on sale, and I bought it the year before. And so it like got mailed. And so I had two of the exact same dresses. So she wears one to school, and then the next day she comes down in the exact same dress. And I was like, hey, you're wearing the same dress as yesterday. And she goes, yeah, but I got it out of my closet. And I was like, I know, but nobody else is going to know that. Like you can't wear it. And she was like, no, I think it's fine. It's clean. And I was like, I know, but like, it's just, yeah, like that thought of, I mean, she could get dressed off the floor, right? Like to put her clothes on from the floor. Cause she's like, yeah, this looks fine enough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm saying some things you can relate to with your
Absolutely.
children.
Yes.
So they're restless and impulsive. They're squirmy, they're fidgeting. And as I say this, don't think the child needs all of these symptoms. We're talking that they need some of them, and they need to show them often in several different locations. So that in school, they might be getting out of their seat when they shouldn't. They're butting into other people's conversations. And now we're talking more about the combined type. They're often asked to quiet down, or they quickly become impatient. They can get over emotional about things, and you'll say, where did that come from? I only asked about tying their shoes, and all of a sudden you've got a child that's very upset. They can overreact to criticism or perceived criticism, and some of that, as I said, is their wiring, but some of it is their history of becoming so sensitive to being criticized. And you could see a child where they're behaving really well in school. The teachers don't report any problems, but when they come home from school, you see them melt down because they've been holding themselves together at school. We call that masking, because they care. Yeah. You know, they want to do well in school. They want the teacher to like them. They want to get along with their classmates. So they control themselves, which is really putting themselves under a lot of pressure and stress. So that's another area that would motivate us to want to get them diagnosed early. when everyone's on board and understands this child has a different kind of brain and there's certain things we do to interact with them more helpfully, that creates a better environment for the child to grow up.
Mm-hmm.
The children, tell me if I'm talking too much, but
no, you're great. This is awesome information. Yeah.
They have social awkwardness.
Mm-hmm.
It's difficult for them some of them, the outgoing types, it's easy for them to make friends, but it's hard for them to keep them.
Yes.
And for the shy types, it's hard for them to make friends because they're just not tuned in to social expectations. They're always looking around as, what are people saying and how do I fit in? And sometimes they'll join groups and not be at the right rhythm.
Mm-hmm.
Some of these children, especially the more inattentive types, prefer solitary activities. They're happier being at home playing with their dolls or reading books or just being with their parents. They don't have that drive to be with friends. And some of that might be because they have felt rejection and they're protecting themselves. Mm-hmm. Some of them could just be the way they naturally are.
Yeah.
And then some of them have sensory issues. They don't like the way the tag in the shirt feels. They don't like the texture of the clothing. They don't like certain foods because of how it feels in their mouth. There's certain things they get, loud noises. Certain environments are hard for them to function in. For myself as a social worker, when I would go to see a client and they had the loud TV on,
mm-hmm.
It wasn't a problem for them, but I had to ask them to turn it down because I couldn't have that distracting me at the same time I was trying to talk with them.
Mm-hmm.
So there are all these different ways that we hope we're trying to educate that parents and teachers could start saying this is ADHD too.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just the hyperactivity, it's all these other things. And what we say is you almost have to be a detective because it's not one outstanding characteristic that is going to point this to you. You
Yes.
have to start adding up. Oh, she's forgetful. Oh, she loses things a lot. Oh, yeah, she doesn't listen very well. And she's having trouble making friends. So you're putting that together to create this composite picture. And that's what's going to lead you to realize your daughter probably has ADHD.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's hard again, because you talked about sometimes it's the masking part, right? When it's the more typical presentation that we expect in terms of ADHD, what we've known historically, that's a little bit more easy to diagnose, but still hard because we may mask in different settings. And that's one of the things that's hard about the diagnosis of ADHD is that we're looking for it in several settings, right? It just can't be at home. It can't just be at school. And so we have to be looking for how it presents in another setting with a different lens.
Well, and that's another reason that we say the early diagnosis helps, even though I've been told that smart girls with ADHD will start masking as soon as 3 years old. As soon as they're around their peers, they can feel they're different and they're trying to figure out how do I fit in. They're starting to mask, but we feel like they're not that adept at it yet.
Yes.
By the time they're 7 years old, they might be trying to mask, but they're not that adept at it yet. So that's going to make the diagnosis easier. And if we educate the teachers about the kinds of behaviors that they should be watching for, we think with a 7-year-old, the teachers are more likely going to see those symptoms.
Yeah. So we could catch it sooner so that the girls aren't having to struggle, or even the boys that are presenting more inattentive.
Yes.
They're not having to struggle for so long to get that awareness. And I think it makes them feel bad, right? Because they just feel like stupid or dumb or what. Yeah.
Well, with masking, we think it means the child saying, I'm not acceptable the way I am.
Mm-hmm.
I have to pretend to be different.
Yes.
And what kind of message is that to have throughout your life?
Mm-hmm.
I can't remember. So masking is really a bad thing.
Yeah. So how do you think social expectations, like talking about masking, how do you think the social expectations or just like pressures, we'll say, to behave, right? Like that piece among girls causes them to mask the symptoms. Like, why do you think that happens?
I I don't know if the word is masking, because I think masking almost happens unconsciously, that the
Okay.
person is just uncomfortable and they're trying to do what they can to become comfortable in that
Mm-hmm.
situation. But on the other hand, there are times that we purposely pretend that we're happy. It's
Mm-hmm.
a by choice. We're saying, I'm with my in-laws just once every 6 months. I can pretend I really like them while I'm with them.
Sure. Yeah.
So that's not considered
Mm-hmm.
masking, although you're not really being authentic. It was a choice you made. So the concern we have is when they're making the choices unconsciously just because they aren't fitting in.
Mm-hmm.
And with I think that happens a lot with teenage girls. I mean, that there's such a drive to fit in, that the thing we say is it's really helpful the girl to get one or two friends that really accept them the way they are.
Mm-hmm.
And the parents are always giving that message, that we love you the way you are, and setting up an environment that welcomes people to be the way they are.
Love that. Yeah. Well, because I think, yeah, just in teenage years, it's so hard to feel
Tricky.
accepted for you are who you are anyways, right? But then to be somebody who is maybe and somewhat different than their peers. I think everybody is weird or different. Like there's no real normal, right? But I think there is a perceived normal.
Well, I
And
think that's catching on more and more.
mhm,
That I interviewed one girl. She was more in her 20s, but she said she was glad she was different. And if we
mhm,
could get to that point where you think of these young people tattooing or whatever, trying to be different, I mean, if we could start honoring the differences, then people will become more accepting of themselves.
yes, yes. Well, and that's part, I think that is a contributing factor to our mental health crisis, just on a bigger scheme, but specifically within ADHD world is just being able to accept ourselves, liking ourselves, like knowing that like there are things that are quirky or different about us, and that is perfectly acceptable and okay, and we can still be that way. That we can be authentically us.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so when we think about strategies or supports that we can put in place to help girls, especially to succeed at home or to succeed at school. What have you heard or personally experienced that really help girls to feel better about being at home or being at school and feel like they're succeeding?
Well, I guess it depends on the age child you're talking about, but what we talk about is scaffolding and structuring and routine. The more that the home is calm and organized and um, again, back to the environment, is providing the things that we think of as good parenting, the more the child with ADHD is going to benefit. So things like uh, nutritious meals served at a regular time and expected bedtime,
Mhm.
um, the calm family, the home of not a lot of yelling, uh, just um, I don't know, the confidence of the parents that they're doing the right thing and the best thing for their child. And that comes from the parent just what we advocate. Sorry to be backtracking, but if a parent starts thinking, well, gee, there's something different about my daughter, I'm wondering if it's ADHD, before rushing to an evaluation, we suggest parents put best practices in place at the home. So
Yeah,
the
talk
things
about
I'm
this.
talking about,
Mhm.
the routine, the structure, the daughter knowing exactly what's going to happen for the day, um, putting up signs to help her with her memory, um, for the parents, not two of them getting involved at the same time, with one at a time to work with her or talk with her. So
Mhm.
trying to keep things as simple and as less overwhelming as possible, and to see if those things alone improve your daughter's functioning. And if it doesn't feel like it's enough, that's when you'd want to seek an evaluation. And for us, we strongly recommend a trial with medication because research shows it's the most effective treatment for ADHD. And all these things that you've been trying to put in place, your daughter on medication is able to perform those things better when she's well medicated. So we like to think that medication often can be the first step to improvement. It forms the foundation because it improves how your brain functions, and then you can learn and practice those new habits more easily.
Yeah. And I know parents a lot of times are apprehensive to look at medication. And I think, I know that it is not maybe the strategy that every parent wants to use, but in my practice, I've also found that ADHD is just a tool, right? Or I mean, medication is just a tool in managing ADHD, and that it's not the whole thing, right? Like we also need those things, the
Yes,
scaffolding put in place to help
it's not
our
by itself. When
yes.
I was growing up, I didn't know I had ADHD, but I had structure. I was brought up in a two-parent home, and there was routine, and I had chores I had to do on a certain day, and I had piano lessons or whatever. I had structure and expectations. I was expected to go to college. So I always said, I don't think I had a bad case of ADHD, but for me, it was bad enough. And then I grew up with that structure without medication. But I feel a lot of children today get the medication without the structure.
Yes.
And I think both are really needed.
Yes. Well, and because the medication isn't teaching us something, right? It only is there for a period of time and then it wears off. And so that our kids can also go to sleep, and us too, as adults who are medicated, right? Like we want to be able to go to sleep. And so if our brain is too stimulated, right? Like then it would be hard to do that. But we also need those like cues to build a neural network of having success too. So then I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, well, I was going to say that it doesn't. People are starting to think that the younger brain has neuroplasticity, and the earlier we get them started learning these new behaviors and practicing these new habits, that is going to change their brain. Because we know if a violin player plays violin all the time in their lives, the part of the brain that has to do with violin playing has grown. So it's just like a muscle. The more you do something, the more it grows. So that we get them started early doing these habits. I've had pediatricians tell me that the child growing up with these habits and with the neuroplasticity of their brain being able to change and grow with these habits, is they don't need medication by the time they become adults.
Yeah.
But I wanted to say more about medication because I recently had the thought that parents are always, you go online, they're always there saying, I don't want to medicate my child. They get praised for following the non-medication route. And I was wondering about medications. Children have depression. And do parents who need to give their children medication for depression feel the same way, that it's wrong to give them the medication for depression? And when I was asking AI about it, they said that it's not as common for parents to worry about giving their children medication for depression. And they felt it was for two reasons. One, because they realize that depression is a serious condition. So we have a problem with parents not realizing how significant ADHD untreated can be.
Sure.
So we need to make them aware of, and that's what these interviews with women got diagnosed later in life, aware of what can happen and how it impacts a girl when she isn't diagnosed and treated earlier.
Yeah.
The other thing is that from the start, because the medications for ADHD are a controlled substance, that creates more stigma. And on the other hand, the medications for ADHD, research has shown, are safer than the medications for depression. And yet they have more stigma because of them being a controlled substance. So those two issues are kind of, I think, where parents are resisting medication. And
Mm-hmm.
if they realize the downside of your child not getting help from medication when they have ADHD and realize the seriousness of it, I think that would help them.
Yeah.
So
Can
many
you?
parents you can read where they say, I resisted and I'm sorry that I did.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, can you talk to some of those long-term side effects or outcomes that you have seen for women that are diagnosed later or that use medication later in life? What are the things that we're trying to avoid as parents?
Well, we know that from research again that untreated children with ADHD are more likely to abuse substances.
Yes.
They're more likely to commit suicide. They're more likely to get injured. They have risky behaviors. They have a more of a track record of going to the ER for
Hmm.
injuries. They are Women are more likely to have unwanted pregnancies. They're more likely to get involved in domestic violence or relationships that are harmful to them. They make sometimes having friends um, is even undesirable friends. Women
Hmm.
told me I chose the undesirable people, but they were the only ones I felt would accept me. So
Hmm.
choosing undesirable companions, probably not doing well in school. When I first got diagnosed, which was 30 years ago, I said that the good things in life were 20% less available to people with undiagnosed ADHD,
Hmm.
like college degree, well paying job, steady employment, uh, marriage that is long lasting. All those things were less likely if you had undiagnosed ADHD.
Hmm.
And the things that were more likely is time in prison. I mean, interactions with the legal system, poor employment history, undereducated. The list goes on. Alcoholism, drug abuse, those things are 20% more likely. So the outlook for ADHD treated is very optimistic. The outlook for ADHD untreated is much less hopeful. So the women I talked to were women who had become successful in their lives, or quote successful in their lives, that they were willing to talk about it,
Hmm.
talk with me about it. And the things that they shared is the feeling that something was wrong, always feeling different, knowing they had ability, but wondering why they weren't producing more or better. So the saddest part for me was when they said, I went to therapy for years and was always told I had anxiety or depression. I got medications for those conditions, and it might have helped some, but it was not the answer. And it was
Hmm.
not until they got diagnosed with their ADHD that they were able to start turning their lives around and feeling like they were working in the right direction. So
Hmm.
the issue of when you don't get diagnosed early, with time, there becomes an overlap of depression or the overlap of anxiety from trying so hard to do things perfectly.
Hmm.
Sometimes you are wired for those other conditions, but sometimes it is just the response of living an undiagnosed ADHD life.
Yeah.
So those are, as Dr. Ferrone says, when parents talk about medication and worry about what the side effects could be, he wants them to know what the possible outcomes are, the likely outcomes are if they don't try medication.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is hard. It's so hard because, I think about, like if our kids got diagnosed with diabetes, we wouldn't be like, okay, I'm going to give them insulin or I'm going to do some more research before I do this. We know that this is a necessary thing, but I'm going to do some more research or I'm going to avoid that. We're going to try to control it with some other entity. But
There's something I saw on TikTok that sounds like a good solution. It's going to cost $3,000 and it's going to take 6 months, but let's do that instead of medication.
yeah.
Something that's not well researched, but it sounds good. Doesn't it sound good?
Mm-hmm. And it's natural or whatever the entity is, right? And I think it's hard because as somebody who has both taken medication and not, so during the time of having babies, I went off of my medication, and so I was diagnosed at age 6, I believe. And so then took medication for a long time, then decided I wanted to have babies. So I went off of my medication. And so I felt like I was more well equipped at that time to be off of medication because I had learned how to do things and how to be successful and follow through with tasks and initiate tasks that I didn't want to do. And, stay on task and all the things. And, wait my turn in conversations and to be a good friend and know those social norms. So I learned a lot of those things and I still was practicing as a therapist. But then when I was done having babies, I was like excited to get back on my medication because I felt like it helped me to be the best version. I didn't have to work so hard to be the best version of myself. And maybe that sounds like a cheat code, but it's really not that. It didn't make me feel so exhausted at the end of the day and so irritable because it was more easy for me to do the things that I wanted to do in the way that I wanted to do them. And I think for parents who don't have ADHD, although a lot of them do, and when their kids are diagnosed, then they're like, this sounds just like me. So I get a lot of those parents in my practice where they're like, well, and especially moms, where they're like, yes, this is probably the more research I've done, the more that this sounds like me too. And so I think, it's about our kids feeling okay to be themselves. And I think, something that I remind parents is we should not have a kid that's a zombie. We want them to be themselves and still be silly and quirky, but also able to like self-regulate and manage their emotions better. Obviously, we're teaching skills too in this. And it's not that the medication does all of that, but it gives them a little bit of space between the thought and the action, right? Or ability to like attune to something that isn't as interesting, right? So like maybe history or science or math is not their favorite, or writing, but they're able to do that task at school and do it to the best of their abilities, not rush through it, take their time I think ADHD can limit their ability to show how intelligent they are because they use other skills to just get it done. And it's more important to have it done than it is to maybe take the time, or they don't want to miss out on something else. Somebody else is getting to play with that thing that I want, or when we get done, we get these books or whatever it is. Sometimes it's hard to know what exactly is in our kids' minds, but we can ask them, like, when you finish this math assignment, did you feel like you did the best you could? And they might say no or yes, but you might say like, what were you, when you were thinking about math, were you thinking about math or were you thinking about something else? Just to be curious about what was on their mind, because they might be like, well, no, I wasn't thinking about math. I was thinking about get the math done so that I could get to that thing, or we could get to recess, or I could go sit in the reading seats, or whatever it was, right, that they wanted to do. And so sometimes it's about us getting curious as parents because we're oftentimes not at school with our kids too.
Yeah, to ask how the day went and understand that. So what Dr. Hallowell tells a story about a husband and wife who was interviewing, and the husband had started on medication, and the doctor asked him how it was going, and the husband said, it hasn't made any difference. And the wife says, if you go off it, I'm divorcing you. So I'm trying to make the point that for those of us that have taken medicine, as Bryce was saying, she feels like she's her best self, but mostly we just feel like we're ourselves. We just feel like this is how it just feels so natural. We don't even aren't aware that medication is underlying what made us feel so natural. And I don't know. I'm not here to sell medication, but I am here to encourage parents that it's a trial.
Yeah.
Something you should really consider for your children, because what Dr. Ferrone said is you really have to understand what the downside is.
Yeah. Well, Yeah. And I think
ADHD.
you might find yourself in a position where the first medication you try is not the best fit for your child. And so there is a part of, a lot of doctors get it right on the first time, right? But not with every patient. It might be something where this mechanism or this medication has a side effect that is undesirable. So then we look at a different medication. So I think openness to being willing to try medications too. And I think another part that's really important is talking to your kid about having ADHD to understand what it is. I think keeping it a secret actually, or like trying to shield them from this
Oh, no.
diagnosis is
No, Dr. Liz Angoff has very good material about how to talk to your child about having all kinds of neurodivergent conditions, and even how to talk with your relatives to get them on board.
amazing. Yeah.
So we have some of that material at our website because we think how you talk to your child about the condition and how you get your family all on the same page is an important treatment strategy.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So, are there misconceptions that you hear from parents frequently that they think like this means ADHD? My daughter doesn't have ADHD because she whatever, or that they didn't realize that something was ADHD, and how and explain some of those common misconceptions. Like they might say, well, at school they do fine.
Right. Well, I think we've covered some of that is that you can't just say it's one thing
Mhm.
and certainly to say your daughter's intelligent and she does well in school and gets good grades does not rule out that she could have ADHD. A
Yes.
lot of bright kids have ADHD.
Hmm.
It doesn't rule it out. So if you ever went to a clinician who right away says they're doing well in school, they can't have ADHD, that's a physician you want to run away from because they're not looking, as I said, at all the clues.
Hmm.
It's more than just how well are they performing academically. It's how
Yes.
well are they performing at home? How
Hmm.
well are they doing socially? How well are they doing in keeping their lives organized and not relying on other people to just so many other factors that could
Hmm.
come into it. Um, I think that that's the biggest one that parents or even women came across when they would try to seek a diagnosis is that you're a doctor. How could you have ADHD?
Hmm.
The false idea that if you achieve anything in your life, you couldn't have ADHD.
Yes.
And that is totally false.
Totally. Absolutely. And oftentimes I mean, the people that I'm seeing are very smart people, right? They're doing well in terms of like what their raw intelligence is and that their capabilities. There's sometimes where they're maybe not achieving that potential. And that's a little bit easier to notice sometimes. But just because they are doing well in school doesn't mean that that is a thing to like wipe that diagnosis away. Totally agree with that. So,
Dr. Barkley says that ADHD is there in people of all different intelligences. And so I wonder sometimes if we're seeing a skewed sample when, because everyone I encounter that has ADHD, I think is really smart, really innovative, really good ideas, really creative. So and even I talked with a nurse who sees people that are in prison and
mhm.
I asked her, and she said, "Oh yes, they're very intelligent." So I sometimes wonder if having ADHD means you're intelligent.
Yeah. I mean, I would agree. As two ADHD women, we agree.
Yeah.
I mean, and I think obviously there's maybe samples out there that are in opposition to that, but I see a lot of intellectually gifted people. Maybe they're not truly, exceptionally intelligent, right? Like that their IQ is 140, but that they are doing well and have the capacity to achieve great things. So either we're skewed, or maybe it really is skewing towards more intellectually gifted people. Okay, so talk to me about what advice do you have for parents if they suspect that their daughter might have ADHD? So listening to this or something previously, they're thinking like, okay, yes. this is something we really should look at. What advice you have about getting started on that process?
Yeah, well, as I said, we really want to get the girls diagnosed by age 7. So at our website, Find the ADHD Girls, we have a checklist we developed. I went through a lot of that checklist earlier in our talk interview today, but we advise parents to fill out that checklist and then maybe keep monitoring using that checklist. How often this week, if you saw a behavior 3 times in a week, that would get a check. So be tracking how often you're observing certain behaviors, and we give guidance as to if your checklist ends up having a lot of checks on it. We're not saying it's ADHD, it's just a indicator that you'd want to schedule an appointment with your doctor. And as I said, in place, you'd also have wanted to put all the best practices in at home to help to boost whatever you can achieve with your daughter before you seek the evaluation. But to go do that checklist and to be collecting the data. So when you go to see the doctor, you don't just say, I'm worried she has ADHD, but you say, here, look at this. All these behaviors are things where she's struggling. And as a 7-year-old girl, should we be expecting these kind of behaviors? And what do you think is the reason for this if this is not what you consider typical or normal? And so having that data when you go to visit is going to help a lot. The same going to talk with the school, having the data, because you could alert them that maybe you're not looking at this often enough. As Dr. Orrin Mason says, that the teacher at the start of the school year might scan the classroom and notice the children that might need extra help. People with ADHD typically do really well in a new situation. So the first week, the first month of school, your daughter might look perfect to the teacher. And then after that, when she starts looking out the window, when she starts not answering the paper answers on the back side of the sheet, when she starts always asking her neighbor what page we are on, the teacher is not registering, oh, there's something unusual happening here, because she already chose the ones in the class that needed the special attention. So the parent coming to the teacher later in the year and saying, I'm noticing these things about my daughter. Could you start to watch in your classroom to see how often you're noticing them too? Because I think that's the other thing the teachers aren't noticing because they haven't been told what to notice.
Yeah.
That it's significant if the child is talking in class, getting out of seat, teasing other classmates, that's significant. But your daughter looking out the window, having a messy desk, not turning in her homework, not putting her name on her paper, that might not rise to that level where the teacher's saying this is a concern. But you can bring it to their attention saying, please watch for these things. And let's get into communication with each other. In fact, just today, I got an email from a psychologist who's developed a monitoring sheet for the teachers.
Oh, love it.
And so we'll be producing that as a handout, as the teachers should monitor certain behaviors every week, and that can go back to the parents. So when she goes to see the doctor, she has her own observations and she has the informed teacher's observations.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so helpful. Well, thank you so much, Cynthia, for all of this information and your efforts to get girls diagnosed with ADHD sooner in life so that we can help them to not struggle so much and learn new skills. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks again, guys. And thank you, Cynthia, for being here with us today to talk to us and help us understand more about girl ADHD, especially the inattentive presentation of ADHD. If you are wanting to check her out more, check out her website at findtheadhdgirls.org and also check our show notes for other resources in terms of inattentive ADHD. With that, I will say thank you so much for your time today. If you could subscribe to our show before you click away, and whatever platform platform that is. We would greatly appreciate it. If you would also share this episode with other people that you think could benefit from a conversation with an expert about inattentive ADHD, that would be amazing. We would so appreciate it. And also, if you would check us out on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube, we would love it. Have a fantastic day. Some words from our legal team.
The information presented in this podcast is not intended or implied to be a substitute for appropriate professional advice, diagnosis, or treatment. All content, including text, graphics, images, and information contained on or available through this podcast, is for general information purposes only. This podcast makes no representations and assumes no responsibility for the accuracy or information on or available through this podcast, and such information is subject to change without notice. You are encouraged to confirm any information obtained through this program with other sources and review all information regarding any condition or treatment with the appropriate professionals.
What we're saying is, yes, I am a real therapist, but I'm not your therapist.